And now we come to our last session. While over the last 2 days, we've talked multiple aspects of education leadership itself. The characteristics, the traits, the best practices, perspectives from leaders and students. A key aspect of this entire mission is about taking actions and taking collective actions. And this final session is about making sense about what could this collective action be towards education leadership. And for this, I invite our moderator, Mr. Sanjay Purohit. Mr. Sanjay Purohit has over 30 years of diverse and global experience across corporate and social development sectors. This spans senior leadership, entrepreneurial roles in various aspects, which is corporate strategy, digital transformation, consulting, sustainable development. Since 2016, Sir at ICSA Foundation has been leading the evolution of societal thinking, a systemic approach to reimagine and induce exponential social change with speed at scale sustainably. And Shiksha Lokum, in fact, is a manifestation of the societal platform thinking. He advises organizations, foundations applying societal thinking, and as well as nurtures young minds and young entrepreneurs through this entire journey. Mr. Sanjay Purohit has been instrumental in shaping Shiksha Lokam's mission and shaping the idea of how we could drive the education leadership mission itself. Over to you, sir, to introduce the panelists and take the session forward.
Thank you so much, Neeraj. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here today. Also the responsibility of moderating a discussion between such amazing professionals who are going to join us shortly for this discussion. While we are preparing for this conversation, I thought I would just sort of warm us up with a short recollection and a story from my recent past. I was in a set of rural schools and peri-urban schools in 2017. And as I was going across school after school, understanding what was happening, interacting with the leaders, with the teachers, with the senior teachers, with the principals, as well as the block education or district education officers, parents, members of panchayat, I started seeing that there were some schools which were doing extremely well, and under exactly the same situation, some other schools were really struggling in a very significant way. And the schools who were doing extremely well were having the same financial resources, under the same structure, similar infrastructure, same kind of parental background of children, which are mostly first generation learners, similar kind of communities, similar access to resources, but they were doing very well. Children were performing, there was excitement, teachers were motivated, parents were participating. And just a kilometer away would be another school which under the similar situations was struggling in a very, very big way. And that has led me to think a lot as to what is the difference. And as we know, the theme of this entire Invocade has been around education system leadership, and the whole sort of insight that the difference that was making a difference was the leadership that was being exercised by the people at the helm of affairs in these schools and the leaders around. And the grooming of these leaders has been an interesting question for me. I met leaders who would walk two kilometers every day, each way, morning and evening, just to get to the school because it did not have access to transportation, and do a fantastic job. And when I asked her, why do you do this? She's a very qualified leader. She could have done something else. And she said, because it's my responsibility. I have met school leaders who would start their day at 6 in the morning, collect vegetables for the midday meal scheme, would go and open the school, get it organized. I met leaders of single teacher schools who have been doing a fantastic job. And of course, I have also met leaders on the other side who have had a difficult time putting this together. The panelists that we have today with us are panelists who have been building leaders and have been leaders in their own right. And hence the conversation that we would try to have together today is more around what does it take for actors in government, civil society, and private sector to come together, build and surface this leadership so that our schools can be built, developed with a better vision, with a better execution, and also seen like a much more structured system rather than just because there are some extremely strong individuals who are putting it together, because that indeed is happening today. But what we need is, India is obviously a game of scale. We are working with more than 1.5 million schools, and our last calculation was that it is being run by about 4.5 million leaders. And what does it take to energize an ecosystem of 4.5 million leaders to actually power up our education system? So looking forward to this panel. I'm super privileged to have an amazing panel with us today. So let me take a minute to bring them on into the discussion. First, let me welcome Agustin, Agustin Porres. Agustin is an experienced education and public policy professional with successful achievements in the development of innovative approaches to education and development of creative solutions to solve challenges around education. He is entrepreneurial minded and has the ability to quickly adapt to changing markets. Worked for many years in public sector in Argentina as an official at the Ministry of Education of the city of Buenos Aires and the Agency of Social Security, leading the education policy area at Fundación Contemporánea. I hope I pronounced it all right. Pardon me if I struggled with it. Before joining the Varkey Foundation, where he is the regional director of Latin America, as the LATAM regional director, he was the executive director of Formar Hub Foundation, a nonprofit organization that supports innovative approaches to education between Latin America and the United States. Passionate about social development and education, he collaborates in many initiatives for the empowerment of youth and social entrepreneurship in Latin America. Welcome, Agustin, and it's a privilege to have you here on the call with us. The next,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Agustin. Next, I would like to welcome Arun Maira. And Arun has been a mentor personally to me in many ways over many years. I have enjoyed working with him many years ago in the past, but he has an unusual combination of experience as a hands-on leader, a consultant to leaders, and a thought leader on subjects of leadership and institutional transformation in the private, public, and social sectors. He describes himself as an author and a thought leader. I love reading his books. And so here we are. He's written several books on institutional transformation, and he writes regularly in journals. Arun was a member of India's Planning Commission from 2009 to 2014, prior to which he was chairman of the Boston Consulting Group India. Earlier, he had worked with the Tata Group in India for 25 years, and for another 10 years with Arthur D. Little and Innovation Associates in the US. Presently, he is chairman of HelpAge International and an advisor to Central Civil Society Networks. Arun Maira was born in Lahore in undivided India on August 15, 1943. And Arun, if I may take the liberty to mention that my mother has the same date of birth. And so it is such a privilege to have you on board with us. Thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing your thoughts as we go along.
Thank you, Sanjay. What a pleasure to be with you again. And to know that I'm following in your mother's footsteps. It's nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to also introduce Mr. Srinivas Katikithala. Srinivas ji, welcome. It's such a pleasure to see you again. It's always a pleasure to learn with you. Srinivas ji currently is the director of Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, where he has been focusing on building leaders for India and the future of India. And I have extremely inspiring memories from a conversation as recent as last night. And so before this, he was the establishment officer at the Government of India. And prior to that, of course, he was the Joint Secretary and Additional Secretary at Department of Professional Training. And that is where I learned a lot again with Mr. Srinivas, because he was shaping a mission for India at that time called Mission Karma Yogi, which is about leading and developing the 22+ million civil servants who are the civil leaders, the Karma Yogis of India, and how do you build their capacity and their leadership. And we will learn more about building leadership in civil services today as we go along. But it's such a pleasure to have you, Srinivas ji. Thank you so much. I know you had a very tough day. I think you finished your class at the Institute probably 45 minutes back. And so welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Awesome. So with that background, you can imagine that my job becomes much more easier because I just have to listen to a conversation between all of you because all of you have such rich experience. So probably I would get started with Agustin and open up the floor by saying, please share experiences from Varkey, from LATAM. Where have you seen the actors in government, civil society, private sector come together and drive change and as well as inspire the leadership to actually raise the bar of the system that you've been working with? So would love to open with your remarks.
Yeah. Thank you very much again for the invitation, for putting together the panel, and I love to hear to others' experiences as well. Very briefly, there is we run a program in Argentina for the past 6 years with the government and with other partners. And there is a Harvard case of study wrote about the program. That is the Harvard case, the people from Harvard came to analyze the alliances that we are creating. Not only the impact of the program on training teachers and what the impact on the education system, but they were intrigued to analyze the relationship between the government, a foundation, other local organizations. And I like the approach because it's something that we have to put more in the table. I will say the crisis that we are on, it's an emergency and calls for creativity, for innovation, and for different stuff. Of course, we have people discussing why a foundation or what an NGO can get into the system, or why not only the government, or different approaches. To those approaches and to those resistance to change, I will say, like, we are doing so bad that if we don't try different things, we are not going to solve the issues that we have today. So the first thing that we need, and specifically in the education sector that is more conservative, we need openness. We need the willingness to learn from others. And we are working with different governments, but at the same time we are learning and we are trying to do new stuff together. So my first lesson, looking back into what we did in Latin America, that we are going with many different governments, is finding people at the government that it's open to hear and to listen to others. At the same time that we are not coming with a one-time solution. We are here with some solutions, but also very open to adapt what we are doing into the local context and into the new lessons that we had. We implement programs in different regions. We learn something in one region that we try to transfer to the other ones. And that is working on all the time. So I will say we need more openness. No one has the one key solution. We're gonna build a new education system, and we will give our child more learning opportunities if we work together as a team. So the second point is we need to review our teams, how we create teams, how we manage our teams, and behind that is leadership. I will stop there to hear from others, but that will be my first approaches.
Thank you, Agustin. Arun, you have been in all the roles. You have been in Samaaj, Bazaar, Sarkar, everywhere. And so obviously you've seen it from all the vantage points. And so would love to hear your remarks on what do you think are the different facets of these roles, and how do we bring them together?
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you. But, again, we were together some 15 years ago thinking about India generally and what would be the best scenario for India and what form of leadership and policies would bring it about. So I'm being reminded of that by what you said at the introduction when you talked about your experience with schools in India. And our subject today is about education. So a talk about the roles of the three actors, the people, that's the Samaaj, the Sarkar, that's the government, and the Bazaar, which is, business sector, in the context of education in particular. I go back a long time in thinking about observing and learning from people who are doing something about the problems that we have. So education was something that I had to, all thinking Indians must get engaged with, what to do about improving the school level education in particular in the country. So I'm just going to mention, I've got many encounters that I could talk about, but 3 over the years. The first was in Nagaland, where Chief Secretary of the Government of Nagaland, then Mr. R.S. Pandey, who became then Secretary for Rural Development at the center, had done some years, some work in the Nagaland government as Chief Secretary to bring about changes in the electricity distribution system, which was also very broken in India, as you know, and we decided to privatize most of it. And it wasn't working. The privatization also wasn't working because people were stealing the power and the private companies wanted the government to discipline them and all the rest of it. The second was education, they're taken in Nagaland. And they took an approach of giving more responsibility to the parents and the community to judge the quality of the teaching in the schools. So government teachers are always thought of, as they're highly paid, don't care, don't come to school even. Their salaries would be determined by a component, would be determined by the parents' views. And they had to change some laws in Nagaland to enable this to happen, and they did that. And they talked then about, the experience of the schools, like you said, what happened in those schools. And this, of course, was then evaluated by UNESCO, I think, and they evaluated this experience in India as the best social change in the world in education at the time. I'm talking about 2000, 2001, something like that. And what struck me was that, we were all struggling with finding better solutions for education, bringing ideas from elsewhere. And here, right in a remote corner of India, UNESCO says this is the best. So what was it that they had done is basically what I said. They started getting Samaaj, that is the people, to take some responsibility, interest and responsibility, because parents are a prime stakeholder. The quality of the education matters so much for them, for their children, and for the future. Then the second one is, of course, the big experience in Delhi, the government, where I've been tracking that and had the privilege of Manoj Sisodia and Atishi over the years to listen to them, why they're doing what they're doing, with their permission, go to schools and actually see it on the ground. And it's been remarkable, as you know. And people are getting confidence that the government can run schools. The government can run schools. And in their model, it's again getting the community involved, parents involved, other stakeholders involved, and giving the teachers and the principals particularly more say. And to your point about systems leadership, and that's the thrust. But here note again that there is no private sector yet, neither is it in Nagaland. And meanwhile, as you know, in our country, there's been a big thing to say government can't deliver school education, let the private sector do it. And examples being cited from Australia and the US and in many places. It became like an ideology here in some sectors. That time is short, government will take too long to change. Let's get private money in, and billion-dollar funds, and I was involved with those also saying, tell us how to use the money. So I said, but don't put up your own schools. Then they thought, I'm a socialist or a communist to suggest that. So the third example I'm going to come to was during the pandemic, looking at all the states, how schools have performed through the pandemic when there's been a big concern around the world of enabling schooling to continue during the disruption of the pandemic. And the greatest concern was that children were going to miss the actual school experience. And if they had access to digital technology like in the US, and everybody could perhaps sit at home and get some sort of schooling. And India, the problem was, as we know, that in many places they could not get access to that. And in Goa, I found that the majority of government schools had operated continuously through the pandemic. And this struck me that why don't we know this? So I asked then the organization that was working there, it's an NGO, that, is this true? So they very humbly said, no, 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 but people are saying so. I said, you tell me. So they gave many examples, and indeed, it was remarkable, this was happening. So I said, how did this happen? And they said, the key is what you said, Sanjay, that you have to make someone the systems leader, and that someone is the principal of the schools. And it's a systems change. And the system change means not just the infrastructure of the school, what the government can provide, or training for teachers or devices to tell the teachers what to teach in the class. It's many actors together who have got stakes, and they will find the solution. Even when there is no internet possibilities, they will keep it going safely with all the other COVID restrictions. So they will apply the medical restrictions and adjust what they do to keep the education growing. So it was remarkable examples. The key again was systems leadership. So as you mentioned, 4.5 million systems leaders we need just in education. You can imagine when you're talking about public health change, which is again has to be a community-based effort, we need probably another 8-10 million people, systems leaders there. You can talk about water conservation and so on, another few. India needs, and I'm saying the whole world perhaps, but India certainly needs more systems leaders close to the ground. So I have been for the last 10 years then distilling what does it take to build a systems leader, what would be the curriculum, if you will. And earlier you and I, when we presented the scenarios of India in Davos, we had this image of the best scenario of India of the million fireflies arising. And those fireflies we described were systems leaders. They were small people in their local places who had a passion to make some difference to whatever they were responsible for, not even responsible for sometimes, from Samaaj, the NGOs, to make a difference. And they were learning how to think of the whole system, various things that interact, just a discipline in their minds. And the second was to get collaboration. So systems thinking and systems acting. And the first is, I would say most importantly, systems being. So to accept that I am a very humble part of a large system. I am a being within it. And the system outside enables me to fulfill whatever I want to do and to live also. So this orientation of being a humble servant in the system or a facilitator of the system, and not like, unfortunately, bosses in government or corporate sector, they want to be in charge and to get people to follow their smart instructions. But that's the orientation of leadership development in the corporate sector as well as in the government. To be a servant leader, on the ground where you have no power, you have no money to give, and yet you can induce a change in the system, which comes about by everyone there who has a stake in it, realizing that unless they work together, none of them is going to get the outcome that they all want. So this is the skill that I have been trying to develop, is how to enable people to work more effectively together to produce results that they all care about. And the heart of it is your word, systems leadership, which requires 3 disciplines: the discipline of systems being, the discipline of systems thinking, and then the more complicated one, the discipline of collaborating and systems acting.
Thank you so much. That was such a lucid sort of design of how could you look at this. And thank you also for reminding of Pehle Bharat, which was the scenario that was a million fireflies. With this, I would love to hear perspectives from Srinivas ji, because he's been looking at literally building a leadership at a national scale. So both in terms of the spearhead of leadership at the Lal Bahadur Shastri Institute, as well as the overall development of leadership. So Srinivas ji, what would be your perspective when you look at it from the lens of doing this at scale for a country of the size of India, and the complexity and the diversity? And so I would just pause here. I would love to hear your perspectives.
Thank you, Sanjay ji, and thank you, everyone. When I look at this, the triumvirate of Sarkar, Bazaar, and Samaaj, my own understanding is that government, Sarkar tends to think at scale, but lacks the ability to work in a very localized manner. It has the ambition to think at scale, wants to think at scale, wants to deliver at scale locally, but somewhere that ability to manage the local, the touch point is absent in the way government is able to deliver. So there comes its interface with Samaaj. How can Samaaj play that localized role? And how can a lot of functions, lot of tasks, lot of delivery be made possible at the level of Samaaj? And that actually causes the third level of problem, which is a kind of a trust deficit. Can you trust the Samaaj to do adequately enough in the manner that I do not presume that the government knows everything that it wants to deliver, but let us assume that it does have a monopoly over the wisdom that we expect it to have. And on the basis of the monopoly, has a certain level of trust deficit insofar as the delivery point is concerned. So at that instance, how do you then build those bridges of trust? What are those systems of trust that would enable Sarkar and Samaaj to work? And when we are talking about large scale activity, perhaps Bazaar can come in to build these trust bridges, giving examples of how it is working, giving examples of how systems can function and demonstrate that they are functioning. A great case in point that comes to my mind immediately in this context is the wonderful experiment and successful experiment of delivery of hot food for the midday meals, Akshay Patra. It's a classic case of a great success, and it is happening every day, practically every state, and in almost all the villages that are covered, and there is no instance of any deficit of trust, and it has been built over a period. That is the first thing. When you look at another dimension, and here, of course, whatever I said applies at primary school and the village level. But on the other hand, if we were to look at education system, maybe at a slightly higher level, maybe the higher education, at that point, what is the signaling that Bazaar is doing in terms of what do we need in terms of skill sets from this education system, so that that skill would improve productivity, that skill would enable immediate employability? How do you manage that kind of a gap? That is another big, I think, connection issue at a systems level between Bazaar, what the Bazaar needs, and what Sarkar wants to give as opportunities for employment, the environment for rapid economic growth. And still, when that kind of a deficit is there, how do you plug these things? So I feel there is a very strong case for building in this three strong pillars that you have identified, a spirit of Bhagidari. The Honorable Prime Minister keeps mentioning this, and I'm particularly captivated by this principle. The principle that everyone has a space in partnership, in an equal space, and you participate in the spirit of Bhagidari, and as opposed to what he described it recently as Thekedari. You know, you ask someone to do your job, hand it over, and then expect somebody else to supervise, and then you have this entire range of trust-based issues. If, on the other hand, if we were able to build a system that was built on the principle of mutual collaboration, as Mr. Maira just mentioned, on the principles of, I would say, equality, equal participation, and I believe a level of equal humility, that yes, I'm not wholly competent to deliver this. Together, yes, we can possibly deliver it. If we are able to build in this mindset, then perhaps we will be able to begin to scratch the problem and start looking at solutions. And finally, for a country of the diversity and the need of India for rapid growth, I think we need to learn how to do things quickly at scale and deliver at scale, because we cannot afford to have any loss of time. Thank you. These are my initial observations.
Thank you so much, Srinivas ji. And I am not going to go with the classical pattern of us talking for a while and then opening for a question. As questions pop in, I'm going to bring them in because that's how we will all get into this discussion. So there's a question from Charul Dhingra, and she says, how do you see the role of non-profits bridging this gap between Samaaj and Sarkar? So instead of looking them as a triumvirate, you're saying, can they play the role of being bridges? What would you see? And then love to hear from, like, we could go in reverse order. We could start with Srinivas ji and then go to Arun and come back to Agustin.
For me, frankly, it does not matter what cap we wear. You can call them non-profit, you can call them civil society, you can call them these days a very important player that has that have come in our we can say our community-led organizations. You know, there are various entities that almost represent small denominations, but they tend to do a fair amount of public welfare. So it could be a religious denomination, it could be a social denomination, or whatever, that they have also started playing an important. So for me, it is not important what cap we are wearing, what ideology we are representing. It is about what we bring to the table in terms of what is the demonstration of your contribution. That is then universally accepted. And that is what finally, you can call it as what is the evidence or what is the data, what is the proof. We can again articulate it differently. But if we are able to demonstrate that competence and ability and have proof of having done so, and we are able to communicate it in a very transparent and a very verifiable manner, we would build these bridges of trust. So for me, building bridges of trust is more important than who is building it.
Thank you. Arun?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to pick up on this very question and also pick up a very important 2 points that Mr. Srinivas had made earlier. One is about scaling. If we could, accelerate the solutions on scale, it would be good. And the government is finding that hard. And second is this trust matter. So the trust between whom? And Srinivas ji did say that it's between the government and the people, the communities. And they were talking now about, is there a bridge between them? And we've inserted, I think, a good point that has been made. These civil society organizations were not activists. Those are also civil society organizations, but civil society organizations who are not even just deliverers, like Akshay Patra, but civil society organizations were actually facilitators of community action. And there are many such in our country, and they work very well. And so lessons from them is how do they build the trust, certainly with the people, which then others, whether they're corporations or they are the government, use, and they do use in the CSR programs. People like to get these organizations because through them, they can reach communities and be trusted by communities. So I've been working and figuring out what is it that these people have to do, because they're key now, it seems. They are the people who make the connect between people and communities and between governments and the corporate sector with its solutions and its CSR also. And this is where I came down to with these organizations over the last 10, 15 years, because they want to develop their capacities to say it's about their own orientation. And a good question that they have learned to ask is, do we have the people's permission to come and help them? The government is required to help the people. It's elected to help the people, even not elected. In any country, they expect the government above to do things for the people. So the government is supposed to be present. The corporate sector quite often rushes in because it's got the solutions and it's got the resources, it's got experts. Here, we can solve your education problem. We can solve your climate change problem. We can solve, anything. But were they invited in? And people will take the help because they do need help and they need the money. And these organizations in the middle, the civil society facilitating organizations, find themselves, unfortunately, caught by the programs and the design of efforts that the government has in mind, as well as the corporate sector has in mind. And certainly every funder has a right to say that you use my money the way I have planned it to be used and account for me accordingly also. So many of these organizations are not as trusted as they need to be. They've begun to be seen as the delivery arms of the government and the corporate sector. So staying with these organizations, and I'm finding that many of them are learning that we're not going to ask for funds, definitely not from the corporate sector. Why? I'll come to that. And also preferably not from the government, though from the government we should, because the government money is supposed to be spent on us to produce results. In the case of the corporate sector, there is a doubt, what are they getting out of it? And there's no question. Many of the corporate sector reach into communities either for improving their brands, to be able to, CSR and market, or to get further markets. C.K. Prahlad's thesis of the profit at the bottom of the pyramid. So they're not going to be that way fully trusted. People will buy their services or take their services for free even, but they don't trust them as being participants and supporters of the community action. So the solution to solving problems on scale, and by the way, the government of India has the best capacity of, I would say, any government in the world, perhaps barring China, of doing things on scale. We conduct elections in this country on a scale which no other country can. And it's done under very arduous conditions, up in the mountains, in the deserts, through the rains. We can get those votes deposited into boxes in a very standard way, electronically. There's trust in that system. We did the Aadhaar card, which is identifying and putting identity cards for 1 billion people all over. Very remote circumstances, situations also, as I said. India can do things on scale. The third, of course, is the vaccinations. I think we've done pretty well in the number of doses that we have been able to give, and again, difficult circumstances all over. And Akshay Patra, by the way, is an example of doing the same thing, delivering meals in middays on scale. So I want to distinguish between making systems change and delivering something on scale. And this is where the shift has to come, I would say, and Srinivas, I'm sure is agreeing with me, that in the government's approach, we know how to run large-scale programs. Swachh Bharat we can do, toilets everywhere. But the second phase of Swachh Bharat, which is now being evaluated, is say, oh gosh, the toilets are there, but the toilets don't quite often work because the common facilities, septic tanks and water purification and all that, which has to be a community facility, is not there. And to create that is more difficult because it's not delivering things, to each person, like delivering things to people's bank accounts individually. It's a community resource, and the community must take responsibility for the management of it. Otherwise, it will deteriorate and we'll be continuously having to repair, maintain, and we don't have budgets for that. And then it falls into disuse. So this is, to my mind, we're talking about, as I said, a whole different approach to producing results on scale. And I think we're finding around the world that for the SDGs, which are systemic problems on huge scales around the world, 17 of them, 16 of them, 17 being partnerships, the solution is local system solutions, cooperatively developed by communities to solve these global systemic problems. And those local system solutions cannot be just an education solution. They have to be a livelihood solution side by side. They cannot be just a livelihood solution. They have to be an environmental protection and improvement situation together. Things go together, public health along with it. So, having specialists come in, either government departments or CSR programs who, give money because that's the cause they care about, it's all very welcome. But there is inside a real hodgepodge with 300 government schemes from different departments, several highly motivated philanthropies all coming in. You're not getting a systemic solution. The people who must be in charge are the community, for which they have to learn to work together as a community also. Yeah, but they are not used to this. They're being used to being told that each of you individually will be taken care of by us. You don't need to be working laterally. On the other hand, until people form into larger, better, self-governing communities, the whole system will not change, and the system will be wasting its resources because you don't need all those resources in every place at one time.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Reminded me in 2018, I asked this question what happens between a block and a school. In India, as you know, school is like school, cluster, block, district, state, country. And we realized that there are 126 processes that are running in a block to manage a school, a unit of school, right? And this is a very, very intertwined, extremely intricate system, because it is in a very delicate equilibrium, if you will. And to improve that equilibrium is a challenge, rather than make a spot change here and there, because the rest of the system just pulls the spot change back to the previous gravity, right? So this view, and we learned that scaling what works is very different from working at scale, right? So it's just the same words, but very, very different. It's a very different mind, and that scaling what works is not the same as working at scale. Let me get to Agustin. Agustin, the same question, but I think one of the audience members, Sugandha, made it even sharper for LATAM. She said, what has been the role of government towards education in LATAM, and the civil society organizations and government partnerships? Is it common in LATAM? Does that happen often? What has been your experience?
Okay, thank you. It's very hard to talk about scale, and it was very clear what Arun said, that you run an election on a scale as India. We are not doing that ever. If we put together all Latin America, we are still half of your size. So I'm here to learn about that. I will not talk about scale, to be respectfully to what you are doing. I will say that, again, as Arun was saying, it's more common in the past 10 to 15, 20 years in the region, but there are still some barriers. And that barriers are not on the impact of the programs or the initiatives, are more, I will say, ideologically or because of preconceptions. Because at the end, when they are and it depends a lot on the government. What happened here is that governments change a lot and change the vision and change the relationship with NGOs. So the hardest thing here is to be sustainable, because we worked 4 years with one government, elections, another government, and they moved to a completely different position. So the sustainability of programs from the third sector, like NGOs, civil society organization, and also government programs, are not sustainable here. In the education sector, the average of an education minister is 2 years in place. So in 2 years, it took you 1 year to understand how to manage your office. The second year, you plan something, and then you're out, and you're starting again the process. And this is common in Latin America, unfortunately. What I will add that it's happening in the region, and I'm talking about Latin America, don't know about India and Asia, there is a continuous movement between the government, the private sector, and the civil society organizations of people, the same people. So the head of a civil society organization is then the minister, and then comes back to a company in the private sector. That's because we don't have the careers on the public sector that other countries have. And it's an open door. So in some ways that it's helping a lot, because you are more humble when you are in a leadership position, because you know that this is a cycle and you are going to be on the other side of the table. What really matters here is that we focus on the problem. That it's now is learning losses and not a problem, the opportunity of growth and developing learning. So for that, it doesn't matter what place of the table you are. The point is that we work together to solve the problem. And for that, what we need many things, but one that I will add, and I like how my colleagues talk about trust. We need to talk more about trust. And for that, there are reasons, or we say virtues, values that help build trust. One is transparency, benevolence, saying the truth. And we need more of that. So we need to work across sectors on how to be transparent, how to have real conversations, not to be defending or protecting only our sector, our interests. And we need to invest in having better people. because with better people in the table, everything is going to be easier. And we need to build more of the conversation across sector, the building projects together, but also conversations, and have them where we are out of power and when we got the power.
Thank you, Agustin. I think that's a very good remark around what does it take to build, and I think more importantly, sustain trust in a system, because trust is built in small steps and can be destroyed in one step. So the question is, how do you build and how do you sustain? For the rest of the time we have together, I would like to invert our lenses. So far, we've been seeing things like the system. We've been seeing things like the state. And to give you a metaphor, I'm sure 15 years ago, or maybe even lesser, when you would go driving in the United States, if you were driving any other country for that matter, you would have next to yourself on the seat this massive map, right? Which was those days called the AAA maps. And you would find yourself through a coordinate saying, I need to go from C1 to A13, and then chart your route and then drive down watching all the road signs to get there. Today, when you open your phone, you appear as a blue dot, and the entire world configures around that blue dot. Everything is with reference to that blue dot. Here you are, and you don't have to find yourself in your corner, but the system finds itself around you. If for the next few minutes, we were to put on the lenses of the school leader, right? I'll give an example. I went to a school and met a school leader, and that school leader would refuse to sit on the head teacher's seat, the chair. He would sit on the side in the conference room, and that chair would be empty. And I asked him, why don't you sit there? He said, I'm an acting school head. I am not the school head. I will not sit on that chair. And he's running the school, right? And he refuses to sit on that chair. And so there are some very interesting emotional moments, because the people that we are dealing with, the leaders who are running the system, they are dealing with day-to-day hard realities. Of course, last 2 years has really put them through extremely traumatic times. So let us flip our hats and look at our discussion from the lens of the school leader, or even the district education officer or block education officer, or somebody from the Sab Shiksha Abhiyan, someone who's looking at this system and saying, there is the government who is working with me. There is the civil society actors, my community around me. There's the private sector. Here I am trying to educate children. And how can I get help? What should I do? Can someone please get me more energy, more resources? I am really trying to do this. And so if you were to take that lens, I would like to probably open the conversation with Srinivas ji. Srinivas ji, what do you think a leader should be doing? Looking at Samaaj, Sarkar, Bazaar, everyone is around. And yet they have this hard time figuring it out, why I am where I am and what should I do differently?
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps before I go there, I would like to pick on the thought Mr. Maira used. I really liked his question. Is, have you been invited to this table? Who asked you in? So there is a question of legitimacy here. Again, going back to trust. And there's a question of agency here. Are you the agency to do this? And do I have the autonomy to take this forward? So, and I also like the metaphor when, if supposing we were to imagine each one of these points, the blue dot, as let us say the school leader or the panchayat leader or somebody who has the agency under the existing system. Now, for instance, today, and I'm talking specifically with reference to India, now we have a constitutional tier of government, which are the panchayats. But there's no question about their legitimacy and about their agency, about they being the space where a lot of action of everybody who is working in this space to converge. So there is a blue dot available. You can enable the convergence. I think in order to be able to do that is, first of all, with that, we should recognize that there is this blue dot, which is the legitimate space. So I feel we have perhaps crowded out too much that space, And there are too many little blue dots moving around. So we are trying to figure out which is the real blue dot. So I think we should recognize, okay, there is a blue dot, and the rest of the dots should perhaps color themselves differently and say, okay, we're going to align and support. That's one. Second, and I come from a slightly different background also. I come from the state of Gujarat. That's my Kada. I worked there for 30 years. And I have seen the pinnacle of local self-government working extraordinarily efficiently. And those were days when panchayats were extraordinarily vibrant. So I have enormous faith in the power of the people to regulate themselves, govern themselves, and do things for themselves. And it is there all around as evidence. So now in that crowded space, if we were all the different entities, all our stakeholders, if we recognize that, yes, let us collectively empower and give agency to that single blue dot, and then harmonize and put our energy behind it, I think we'd have solved a lot of problems. Because then we no longer figure out that, okay, do I have this much space? Does somebody else have the other space? How do we collaborate, etc., etc.? We merely converge around that single space and figure out ways of participating. I think that's a very important conversation we need to have, which takes me to the next step, is how do we create autonomy and how do we create capacity in that blue dot? That is a big problem because perhaps we are not investing enough, or we need to figure out better ways of investing so that you make that person who's not sitting in the chair to own that chair. Sit in that chair, that for the moment that I am, or for that period that I am that in charge principal, I am the principal. It does not matter whether I'm I by C or I by D or whatever. I take on that agency, I become autonomous, and then we start converging around it. Perhaps a reluctance for not sitting in that chair comes from this entire conundrum that the other blue dots are questioning his legitimacy. Are you really legitimate? Ought you to be sitting in that? So I think that's a big issue that we should resolve. And perhaps it's not a big problem. It can be solved very easily. Once solved, we can create convergence strategies. Again, not a big problem, because once this issue is resolved, a vast majority of government finance can easily flow in that direction because it is, as I said, a legitimate level of government. It is recognized under the Constitution. It is the fourth tier after the 74th Amendment. And there is a lot of agency that has been given through the institutional structure. So we have to create these, I think, spaces for harmonization and building capacity for that level. Not really build patchwork of support systems, a bandage here, a tying up there, bringing somebody else as a prop. All those should come in as a proper support system, not as patching ins. This is my observation.
Thank you, Srinivas ji. I think that was a very straightforward, emphatic direction, saying if we get this right, the rest of it will follow. Would love to hear Arun's views. How are you thinking about this, Arun?
Well, very similarly to what Srinivas ji was saying, and I will take it back to specifically the question that you asked, is about the blue dot. And as Srinivas ji said, we have to concentrate on now in thinking of what the blue dot does and how blue dots can do more effectively what the persons at the center, the agency of the people, needs to do. My definition of leadership is a leader, she or he, who takes the first steps to something that she or he deeply cares about and in ways that others will then wish to follow. The leaders of change, especially social change, in circumstances in which the whole system is stuck in a way of thinking, and these leaders do not have position of authority on the top. They are not the government chappie on top, now the CEO of a large corporation. They are in the community and they wish to help the community to be better. There must be a passion, a caring for the cause of the people. It hurts you, it hurts them. And together, therefore, there's the trust that we all are working towards the same need. And it's not the leader's need, it is the need of the people around. And thus, Gandhiji certainly was a great example of this, that people trusted him with their lives, would, risk their careers, because he was clearly to them someone who was doing it for them. He had no resources. I mean, he didn't have the authority. He was not in that chair, nor did he have any money to sort of pay them and join the sort of civil society organization, and then we will do it. And he had no sticks to beat them with if they didn't come along. He was not that sort of authority or dictator. Yet millions followed. Why? Because, as I said, he was taking steps towards something that he deeply cared about. It wasn't about his success that came out, but that's not what was motivating all the difficult steps he was taking. It was caring for a cause, and it was the cause of the people. How did he know that? Because he was listening to them constantly. And it's by listening to someone, giving them the feeling that you are hearing them, their hearts, and not telling them and lecturing to them about what they should be doing and the smart ways that you have of teaching them, that builds that trust, that this person understands me, this person will not hurt me. Okay. And then, of course, I might give that person the authority to then say, so what should we do, as Gandhiji did get. He takes the first steps. That's critical. If you're looking for best practice examples from somewhere before you take the first steps, I mean, someone else is the leader in creating that idea, that practice, you are a follower. And so this in change, which has to be innovative in all local situations because they all are different, you cannot be waiting for finding the best practice for somewhere which are absolutely fittable into your situation, because you can wait till the cows come home and you won't find something exactly. You just have to be innovative, take a risk towards something that you deeply care about. But in taking the risk, it's risk. You must understand very clearly the consequences of your action. Will you, by the big fix that you have in mind, cause something? Will it backfire and harm? To know that, you got to, as I say, understand other parts of the system that connect with whatever you are thinking is the most important thing to do at that time. And to connect with other parts of the system, it means connecting with the other stakeholders around who have different passions, who have different resources. And from that comes then also the opportunities, that there are resources that people could be sharing with each other towards a larger collective purpose, and thus you build community. So take the first steps towards something that you deeply care about, but please listen to everyone else for the sake of both getting their trust as well as understanding the system, and take the steps. Then you'll be seen as the leader, and they'll be following with you because they feel that at least you are doing it in their interest, and there may be a risk. And you do get risks, as we did in the freedom movement. But yes, I'll continue. I mean, the person may have made a mistake, but it was not because the person didn't understand us. We all collectively have made the mistake, let's say, in that way. So this quality to develop in people, it's the fireflies I was saying again. These three disciplines are extremely important. One, as I said, is to understand that you are a humble part of the system. I am not the person on the chair, and I don't have to be the person who's given the chair before I act. This is the corporate mindset. When you're the CEO, then you can get things done. These people are CEOs or nothing, I mean, these organizations. So often I ask the young people around, just draw me a picture of an organization that is required to produce this change. As soon as they insert the word organization, they start drawing some sort of hierarchy. So that's not the form of organization that's going to produce the change. Huh? And I do find, interesting, Sanjay, and you might recollect this too, women, when they were asked this question, especially poorer women from our villages, could you say, what sort of organization would be required to do this? They do not think of organization as much in this hierarchical fashion as working men do. And they would sort of think, this person, that person, wo family, bhaiji, and that is the community. And that's the map they would draw up. And that's what we have to learn, that organizing, a community organizing itself is quite different to someone above trying to organize the community. First, it has to organize itself into its various departments in the corporation or in the government. And that itself is so complicated, because in that also there's a hierarchy and we're all looking up to someone up there, and no one has got the agency really. They're good soldiers to implement. And we want to make the community at the end of it good executors of our plans. And so this question about the Panchayati Raj, I've delved a lot into it, is why has it not gone so far in India? It comes to, like I found in the government when I was there, the people would say, the government would say, rightly so, that the people might make a mess. They might have not the knowledge of how to spend this money effectively. So we would have to tell them what to do, but they're like our execution arm. I said, but what has to be done has to come from them, because you got your own idea about what is to be done on scale. And so trust them to guide your actions rather than you telling them what actions they should be taking. It's a change in orientation of leadership for the government people and for the corporate people, people outside, that we are humble servants and the wisdom is in the people. And until we listen to them, we will not A, know what is required to be done, and B, frankly, we may not even know how to do it well.
I think the topic of agency came in multiple times, and also the fact that there's a difference between distributing solutions and sharing the ability to solve. And most of the time we may be geared up to saying, if you have to do something at scale, then we should standardize it and distribute it, vis-a-vis saying, no, I don't think that would really work. What you need to actually percolate and share is the ability to solve, saying you solve it, we are here to help you build that ability rather than give you the solutions. I think that's a very, so in LATAM, Agustin, when you look at it from the eyes of the school leaders and from the ground, what do they see when they look at government, civil society, private sector? What's the view?
It's improving. I say before, these people change a lot in the past, and actually, and so they are quite isolated as a defense mechanism. They came together and said, okay, if the minister is going to be changing every 2 years, I will not take much care of that, because they say something different, and they continue changing. I think now, and also because of there are other issues like social media, different ways to communicate, so we can listen more, we can hear more to the actors and get to know them better. And in some specific ways or places, the trust is growing. In that way, I think as challenges for school leaders, we need to give more autonomy, not to be isolated, to be communicated, to be working as a team, but with more autonomy, because we are reducing the initiatives. People are trying to do changes, but they know they don't can. The regulation doesn't allow them, and at the end, they lose the willingness to change. So I would say autonomy is something to keep in the discussion. And what I would like to say to close is, I totally agree with the last comment from Arun, and I will say that let's come together and go to train those leaders. Your definition of leadership is amazing. Let's get the young people and train them as those leaders that we want for the future. Let's invest in that leadership, because we need them, and we need them not when they are CEOs, ministers, officials. We need them when they are on the 20s, to get them in a better way, in a better shape. So whatever efforts we can do, and we are working in some ways in Latin America to train young leaders, we want to train today the ministers of the next 20 years. And I hope we can do that together.
That is a fascinating note. So I would like to use that note to bring in the last leg of this, the last question of the conversation. If we were having this discussion 5 years from now, what should we do? What should we have done 5 years ago so that we are not discussing the same problems after 5 years? From a government perspective, from a civil society perspective, from a private sector perspective, we are here 5 years hence, looking back. What do you think we should have done in terms of building the leaders, bringing cross-sector collaboration, invoking agency, ensuring the blue dot is the blue dot, ensuring all the other distracting dots are not the blue dots, all the stuff that we spoke about, inspiring, injecting leadership, creating some culture of constancy, purpose? What would be good first step to have taken? Whoever would like to go first, I would not call out.
Sanjay,
Sorry, Arun.
yes, we're talking of a very different approach. All three of us, yourself too, all four of us, are saying we've got to change the whole approach to producing solutions on scale for problems which are really on scale, and whether climate change or anything, we are behind it. They are running ahead of us. Inequality running ahead of us. Now breakdowns of economies running ahead of us, and we are still trying to solve them in the same old way. As Einstein said, it's madness to try and solve a problem by working harder with the solution that has caused the problem. So it is our approach to producing change that we have been using all this time on scale, top-down, large organizations, experts on the top, that has created this problem. So the first switch, I say immediately, if many of us who have got Srinivas ji and others, a responsibility for training or putting the right ideas into future leaders, as Agustin said, that is the first step, immediately. And don't start working on the people on the top. Why? Because they are obliged to exercise their roles as defined for them, and society expects them to do it in that way. It will have to be people who don't have power. The young people who are not yet CEOs, who don't still have, hundreds of millions of dollars that they made in some unicorn effort and they want to give it away. That's the advantage of doing this way, that many more are accessible to us as being the potential leaders, okay? So these people, if we start to ourselves help them, what we'll notice already is there are many such already. And we start to then recognize and celebrate what they do and make them the role models that others aspire for. Right now, the whole discourse on making change and role models for leadership is, well, the people on the top who got big positions, either as ministers or something, netas. I wish, when I get there, I will do something which they are not able to do. It's going to take a long time to get there. And why are people saying this? Because they don't think that the leaders up there presently are doing the right things. So this model of leaders who are thinking and got the power to keep thinking of them as leaders of the society is first to be changed. Second model we have more recently for the last 20, 30 years is the people who made a lot of money are sort of the people who know how to make wealth, and they are the wealth creators for society, maybe. And so we have them on the covers of things. We celebrate how rapidly they've grown, the unicorns that have grown and created $1 billion in the stock market without any real effect on the lives of people, real people on any scale around them. And we celebrate these also as economy leaders, right? Leaders, peacocks, I'm saying they are, because they're very fine clothes and finery. And the third is, we are celebrating leaders who have, authority and can get things done. They're usually also called leaders, whether it's the leader of a more authoritarian country or an army. So these models of leadership, which are young people are looking at and saying, I want to be that or the other, and then maybe I'll do something that is good for all of us. Yes, start right now. You have the ability to be a leader right now. And I won't repeat again what I said. So I would say I have to track the leading indicators to see whether you're going to get them in 5 years. If in the first few months, many of us who have the responsibilities to train mid-level leaders or help with encouraging small leaders, or who have the ideas which could help those who have to train these leaders, don't become more active and more visible, then I would say these ideas, which have been around a long time, will continue to be struggling against the big idea. And then I say, no, in 5 years' time, Sanjay, you won't have seen much change. So I want to see more fireflies. I want to see less peacocks. I want to see less buffaloes. I want to see less tigers. Peacocks mean rich and wealthy. Buffaloes means big positions. Tigers means, growl and authority. I want to see the fireflies, and they are. Let's start celebrating, let's start supporting, let's start learning, and that would be a community of leaders.
Wow, that's a brilliant visualization. But before I go to Srinivas ji, I would request Agustin to stay because he has to leave. He has a meeting with the President of Colombia, for which we can't keep him. So can you please go ahead, Agustin, make your closing remarks, and then you may want to leave.
Yeah, well, thank you very much again. And I will say that last point, I think, is one of those key solutions to, if we start training those young leaders today, in 5 years, they will be there. And if I have to add something, we need more, and this is a Latin American perspective, we need more informal conversations. As we are all moving around the table, as I was saying in the past, we need to sit down and those who are leading the government, the unions that play a critical role here, companies, we need to sit down. We need to have dinner together, to share views, not on the official meetings where we need to discuss and where we need to be seen as on the opposite side. We need to come together where we're on the places where we can have real conversations. And if we have that conversations, if we really interact, in a few years, we are going to be on a better place for sure, because we will get to know each other. We are talking about a sector where we all want to transform the world in different ways, but there is some altruism here that we need to use as an advantage. So thank you. I love the conversation. I admire your country, and it's a great opportunity to keep learning about what you're doing. Count on us from this small, tiny county and at the end of the South, and we are willing to do more things together.
Thank you so much, Agustin. It has been a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Agustin.
Later. We
Thank
come
you,
back to, thank you. We come back to Srinivas ji.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. I'm actually very happy to answer this question for the simple reason that over the past 6 months, we have been grappling and reorienting a lot of things that we are doing exactly on these lines. And I did share a few papers and thoughts with you last night, but for the sake of all our colleagues around this conversation, we are trying to create a new template of what Honorable PM 4 days back called the Amritkal leadership, because this is a group of people, and fortunately I am in a place where I deal and interact with a young set of people who, while intended to occupy very high positions, are going to work at the real cutting edge for the next 5 years. So since you asked me to look back 5 years hence, look back, so I am looking at 180 every year. Currently I have 180 here, and 5 we are talking about 900, which means that they are far more than the number of districts that currently exist in this country. So you are going to have 900 leaders who are being exposed to a different type of thinking. And the kind of thinking that we are trying to inculcate and the exposure that we are giving currently is, for paraphrasing reasons, is what you could say is the Sabka Prayas leadership. For instance, we in the last 4 or 5 months have interacted very deeply with the leadership, social leadership that has delivered on ground and which has been recognized and acknowledged. We had them come over and interact with these potential leaders. They're not yet leaders. They're learning to lead, learning to go and participate. So we're trying to give them an understanding of what is the impact that social leaders and leaders of the kind of spaces that Mr. Maira spoke of, people who have worked in the area of, let us say, amelioration of women, people who have worked in there is, for all the Padma awardees, there is this great lady who worked to rehabilitate women who have been accused of witchcraft and who have suffered so much. These are people without any power, accepting the sheer power of their own will, and then went and made that huge difference. So in the past 3.5 to 4 months, we have been having these very intense conversations with all of them, and we are trying to create a set of community level government officials who would work in a democratic way, who would work in an engaging way, who recognize the power of collaboration, and who recognize that finally that the true impacts would come only when the collective starts working together, which means in a way you start making yourself redundant in that process. So self-redundancy is a kind of a virtue we're trying to put as a thought in this process of nurturing the leadership. So I'm frankly very confident with the way we are approaching the training and the capacity building, as well as sensitization of the new generation of leaders of government who are going out now. And we do hope that all of them are imbibing this, and when they go out there and start working with the communities, with these social organizations, and start dealing with problems, not so much as problem solvers, but as people engaging with, trying to find solutions, the solution seekers. I think we will have a great breakthrough happening in the next 2-3 years. And for us, a big single mantra with 3 big virtues, which we constantly reinforce every day in the academy here, are the 3 virtues of ability, austerity, anonymity. These are the 3 cardinal principles around which all our thought, all our thinking, all our pedagogy, a lot of our conversation revolves around this. And you can interpret each one to represent and be a holder of everything that we have said. And this is the culture which we are trying to generate in the young set of civil servants who are passing out now. And I'm personally very confident that we will see the next generation of civil servants who are, we tell them right now that you are the ones who are going to serve this country when it turns 100. So in the next 25 years, you are the people who are going to see the various developments that are going to happen, that are going to make our country great and truly make it find it at the top of the world. And as one of our recent colleagues, this week has been very interesting. In fact, we have been trying to give them a sense of what it means to be a part of this process, not what it means to be this. So and therefore, in the last 4-5 days, all these young officers have interacted with an enormous canvas of experience. We've had around 45 very successful, eminent leaders from the civil service, representing almost 40 years of experience, and from 21 different states, converge and have conversations with them and try and tell them that what are the things you ought to really be thinking of to really succeed. And one of my colleagues said it so beautifully, saying that my generation, we are all from that generation, pursued the American dream. Now you should help your generation pursue the Indian dream. I think they will somewhere make a difference and go in that, strike in that direction.
Thank you, Srinivas ji. Thank you, Arun. And this has been such a thoughtful and a thought-provoking conversation that I would mess it up if I tried to summarize it. So I will not do that. I think all the people on this call who have stayed at this hour to have this conversation are committed enough to the cause. And if 50 of us today here, if we go and talk to 50 people tomorrow, then we'll be 100 tomorrow and 200 the day after. And I think this question that leadership, agency leadership, is the heart of this game plan. And hence, it's our collective responsibility across government, civil society, and the private sector to groom the agency leader, which would be here when India turns 100. And I think that's a great place to be. And to Arun's point, that it is something that is possible to conceive and it can be done, but it has to be done as a system rather than as a point intervention here and a point intervention there, because those things don't last. So super grateful for you having spent this time and given so much to us. And thank you so much. Please take care, stay safe. And this is a mission we are all on, and we will be back soon. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arun ji, Agustin, Srinivas ji, for sharing such enriching experiences and helping us imagine what this collective action of Samaaj, Sarkar, Bazaar could look like. for this mission. Thank you, Mr. Purohit, for facilitating such a power-packed and insightful session. This will definitely catalyze numerous thoughtful actions within the ecosystem. With this, we come to the end of the formal sessions of InvoCare.